Hello everyone, and welcome to another Pyro Gaming video. As promised, here are my favorite loadouts and weapon selections and armor sets and all that stuff for the Titan. So jumping right in, let's start with subclasses. Striker has become my favorite subclass in the game of Destiny for the Titan, just because it's solid, man. Like back over the summer, we got a buff to Fist of Havoc in PvE, and it makes it a very viable option. I mean, if you put Arc Burn on, this thing actually takes a significant chunk off of a boss's damage if you do Fist of Havoc on them with Arc Burn. It's really fun to use, man. So this is my go-to build here for the Striker subclass. We'll start over here. I like to run the Flashbang Grenade for both PvE and PvP. This is really good. Alternatively, the Pulse Grenade and Lightning Grenade do have their places in PvP. I just don't really care to use them all that much. I really like the Flashbang Grenade, not necessarily for any particular reason. It's just it's fun. It's good to use. Next up on the jump, I use the same jump on all three of my Titan builds, or all three of my Titan subclasses. I prefer increased control because when you have the lowest agility, you can do that fucking fun Titan skate thing, and it's really fun to use. For my Fist of Havoc, I do like to use Aftermath. Fist of Havoc leaves a damage-dealing field in its wake. I will use this for both PvE and PvP. In PvE, it's great on bosses because they'll just stand in it for a few seconds. And in Crucible, it's really good because so many times I have ran in and threw down my Fist of Havoc, and then maybe somebody killed me or something like that with a shotgun. They don't realize that they're still standing in my Aftermath, and I get kills. I get more post-mortem kills with Fist of Havoc, I think, than I do with actually initiating Fist of Havoc. It's pretty ridiculous. Alternatively, you have Death from Above. We're going to talk about this here in a second. This is a good one to have, but there's an exotic that gives it to you for free. And lastly, you have Shockwave. Fist of Havoc unleashes a wave of devastating energy, which travels along the ground. This one could be good, but there's another way to have a similar effect that we're going to talk about shortly. So Aftermath is definitely going to be my number one thing. I don't change this at all for Crucible or PvE. Over here on Stormfist for the melee, I typically run Overload for pretty much everything. It's a really good, melee to have in PvE because against low-level enemies, you can sometimes get your melee back instantly. But if I'm not doing that, sometimes in Crucible, I will put on something like Discharge. Hits with Stormfist deal an area effect damage around the target. This is good if you're getting in a lot of melee battles, because typically if you're close enough to melee somebody and you actually have time to melee somebody in the Crucible, they're going to be meleeing you back, so that little bit of ticking from that area of effect is going to lower their shields enough to where you can just put a shot into them instead of waiting that like second and a half before you can melee again. So this is definitely going to be really fun to use in PvP. I will switch to this from time to time. As far as my armor, recovery, and agility, you can see here that I go armor is my priority, recovery is my secondary, and I don't give a shit about agility. So you will see the Titan Codex 1 and Titan Codex 4 on all of my characters, all of my subclasses, I mean. Here in the middle, we have Headstrong, Aftershocks, and Transfusion. Now, I like to use Aftershocks because it increases the duration of Pulse Grenades, Lightning Grenades, and Aftermath, as you can see here. So without Aftershocks, I think Aftermath will tick 2 or 3 times, and then with Aftershocks, it'll tick twice as much. I don't know the exact number, but with Aftershocks, it lasts a lot longer, and it's going to give you a better chance of somebody going into that area of effect without realizing that it's your fucking Fist of Havoc, and it will kill them in 2 ticks. It's fucking great. So I definitely use that. Another good option would be Headstrong, sprint faster, and sprinting increases the leap distance of Fist of Havoc. There is an exotic that gives you this perk for free, but it's not a very good exotic because that's all it gives you. And lastly, we have Transfusion. No, wait. Headstrong. Okay, yeah. So Helm of Inmost Light here, had to think for a second. It gives you Headstrong and Death from Above. So that's what I was talking about earlier. Like with this right here, if you're using Shockwave, it's going to be so that you can get your Fist of Havoc to travel a distance if you want to kill somebody that's not right up on you in a normal Fist of Havoc range. But if you're using Helm of Inmost Light, which I typically use in the Crucible, it'll give you Death from Above, which allows you to do a quick double jump, aim at your target, and fly down at them, which is going to give you that extra range on your Fist of Havoc. And then it will also give you Headstrong as a free perk so that you can run... Your Fist of Havoc will have Aftermath, Death from Above, Headstrong, and Aftershocks, which is a pretty fucking OP build. It's really fun to use. I definitely recommend it. And lastly over here, I like to use Unstoppable because with Death from Above, we're going to be jumping before we shoot, so there is going to be a brief period where you kind of are a sitting target, just floating in the air there. So when you activate your super, Unstoppable is going to be great to have. Plus, when you use Unstoppable, you can see here that we lose quite a bit of armor when we go to Shoulder Charge or Juggernaut. Unstoppable gives you that extra bit of armor that actually maxes out the Titan's armor and makes you a fucking bullet sponge, which in my opinion is what the Titan should be. He's a tank, right? That's what he should be doing. But alternatively, you can use Shoulder Charge. I do not use this because it pisses me off when I get killed by this. I think that Shoulder Charge should take your melee every time that you use it, and you should have a cooldown on it like a normal melee, but that's just my opinion. And lastly, you have Juggernaut. Again, I do not use this. I think it's a bitch tactic. I don't use it because I don't like when other people use it, and I'm not going to be a hypocrite. So I keep Unstoppable on all the time, and that's pretty much it. So this is my build for both PvE and PvP. I very rarely ever mix this up at all. Like I said, sometimes I will put on the Pulse or Lightning Grenade if the situation calls for it. If it's a Nightfall with Arc Burn, I can put a Lightning Grenade at a doorway where ads come out and it's going to kill a lot of them. And that's pretty much it for Striker. Now on to Defender. I don't change this up at all. The only changes that I will make here, and actually that's not supposed to be there. So the only change that I make in this subclass, I'll go ahead and tell you, is I will switch from Blessing of Light to Weapons of Light. I do not use this subclass in Crucible at all. Every time I'm in Crucible with my Titan, I am using Striker, and I will occasionally use the Hammer subclass that I can never remember the damn name of, Sunbreaker. But I never ever use Defender in Crucible because I think it's a wasted subclass. I would much rather get a kill with my super as opposed to pop a bubble and try to wait for somebody to come in so that I can bait them into killing them with a shotgun. That's a bitch tactic, and I don't like it. So again, much like Juggernaut and Shoulder Charge, I'm not going to be a hypocrite and use something that pisses me off when somebody else uses it. So, but if I was going to use Defender in Crucible, which I would not, I would use Armor of Light or Weapons of Light. Weapons of Light, if you have a high-impact sniper rifle and you are buffed by Weapons of Light, you can sometimes one-shot them to the body if it's Trials of Osiris, Iron Banner, stuff like that, where light level advantages is enabled. So that's definitely good to have, but for the most part, I think the main tactic for the Titan bubble is going to be something like drop this over, drop this over a control zone, drop this over the Spark and Rift, something like that. And for instances like that, you're going to want Armor of Light because you're going to be really hard to kill, and you'll be able to melee them to death or shotgun them to death before they can kill you. So moving on, we have Disintegrate. I typically use War Machine. While Force Barrier is active, all your weapons reload and ready blindingly fast. In addition to that, you do get the Overshield, known as Force Barrier, so that's fantastic. Another option that I would have here is Force Barrier is active, all your melees create Orbs of Light. I don't really use that. And Unbreakable, Force Barrier continually recharges. This is really good in Crucible. I will switch to that if I would use this subclass in Crucible, but I don't. Another thing, I use Magnetic Grenade for, whatever I'm going to use. If I was going to go into Crucible, I would still keep on Magnetic Grenade because sticky grenades are going to kill your enemy if you stick them, period. So that's pretty much all I use there. Alternatively, in PvE, if the situation calls for it, if I'm going up against a boss that will just sit in one spot and it's something like Void Burn, the Spike Grenade is going to be the one that I use because it will tick for about 1,000 per damage cycle, and it will tick a shitload of times. So Spike Grenade definitely has its moments. I will switch to that from time to time. Again, we have Titan Codex 1, Titan Codex 4. We're going Max Armor, Recovery second, and Agility last. Over here, I like to use Bastion, increase the duration of Ward of Dawn. For me, this is the only option that I'm going to use. If you're going to use a bubble, it's because you're doing something where you're going to need that extra protection around you. So why not use the perk that makes it last longer? Relentless, increase the strength and duration of Force Barrier, don't care about that. And Gift of the Void, the only time that I will use something like this is if I'm doing a Challenge of Elders, which I haven't done since Rise of Iron came out because it's not relevant anymore. That will be the only time that I use this. Other than that, I'm keeping Bastion on. Next up, we have Untouchable, reduce the cooldown time of Ward of Dawn. Now, what this actually does is when you have max intellect, it will drop your cooldown time to 3 minutes and 40 seconds as opposed to 4 minutes like a normal super. So using Untouchable is going to take 20 seconds off of your overall cooldown time on your super. So that definitely has its place. Alternatively, you could use Shoulder Charge. Oh shit, I went into the wrong subclass. I was like, wait a minute, Shoulder Charge on fucking Defender? What kind of sorcery is this? But anyway, heavy weapon kills have a chance to create an Orb of Light. I don't use that. And Illuminated, increase the benefits granted by Blessing of Light and Weapons of Light. I don't use that because typically when I'm running Defender, I'm going to use either Helm of Saint 14, which blinds enemies that come into my Ward of Dawn, or I'm going to use the Glass House, which makes Weapons of Light and Blessing of Light last longer. So I feel like I'm going to get this perk by using Helm of Inmost, or using the Glass House, even though it isn't exactly the same. Having these buffs last longer is going to give you more damage in the long run or more of a shield in the long run. So I don't use this. I would much rather have Untouchable and get my Ward of Dawn more often. Lastly, on Sunbreaker, we'll go ahead and take a look at this. I don't use Sunbreaker all that much. I don't really care for it. Like I said, I pretty much main every time I'm on my Titan, so it is what it is. But I will use the Fusion Grenade in both PvE and PvP because sticky grenades are one-shot kills, and they're just fun to use. I don't really care for these other two grenades all that much, so for me, Fusion Grenade is the only option. Here, I stick with Increased Control. Hammer of Soul, I will run either Forge Master for PvE. I will also use this in PvP from time to time, but typically when I PvP, I will switch to Sun Charge. Pressing right bumper hurls you towards an enemy, which makes you harder to kill while you're in your super. Think of the Ionic Blink feature for the Warlock. Without you actually disappearing and teleporting, you stay visible, but while you're zooming around the map, you're definitely going to be a harder target to kill. And this last one down here, I don't use this pretty much at all. The only exception might be if it's, like a Solar Burn Nightfall or something like that with a lot of ads. I will use Scorched Earth because those sunspots will kill some enemies for me because they do solar damage. Over here on Sunstrike, for PvE, I will keep Stoke the Forge, reduces Sunstrike cooldown. Getting a killing blow with Sunstrike instantly recharges it. This is great for strikes and stuff like that with a lot of low-level adds. You can one-shot melee them and instantly get your melee back, so that's definitely fun to use. In the Crucible, I will typically use Solar Vent. Sunstrike releases a solar explosion on hit. Kills create a sunspot, damaging enemies inside. So you have three different types of damage that you're doing here. You're doing the initial melee damage, you're doing the sunspot, and you're creating an explosion. So it's really good for those melee battles in the Crucible. You can melee them once, and after everything's said and done, you can probably just pull out your primary and shoot them once or twice, and they're going to die, depending on what type of primary that you're actually using. But yeah, it's going to save you time. A lot of times, you melee each other, and you both have to wait a second or two before your melee can go again. So meleeing them once with Thermal Vent and then shooting them is going to be a really good option to go. Again, we have Codex 1, Codex 4, Armor number 1, Recovery number 2, Agility is bullshit, who cares? And over here, I typically run Flameseeker. I'm not really good at throwing hammers. I miss a lot. So Flameseeker alters your Hammer of Soul flight path to seek out your enemies. This really benefits me because, like I said, I miss a lot when I throw these things. Another good option here would be Explosive Pyre. Enemies felled by your Hammer of Soul explode, chaining fiery solar damage to other enemies. This is really good in Crucible if you are capable of landing your, hammers, but like I said, I'm not really good at it, so I'd rather have this. But if I am using Sun Charge, then I'm not going to use this because I'm not going to be throwing hammers. I'm going to be hurling myself forward, in which case I'm going to be doing this one right here. Enemies felled by your fire grant you bonus agility and reload speed stacks up to 3 times. So when I'm using Sun Charge and I combine that with this, every time I get a kill, my Titan is becoming faster and faster, if you can imagine that. So you can see that little agility boost that we get there. If you look up here, equipping Fleet Fire is going to give you more agility, which means when you hurl yourself forward, you're going to move faster, and if you're moving faster, obviously you're harder to kill. So that's what I will use in Crucible, but in PvE, I will stick with Flameseeker. Now next up, we have Simmering Flames. I keep this on in PvE. This cuts your grenade and melee recharge times about in half. Don't hold me to that, but pretty close to about 50% if your super is full. So you can spam grenades a lot easier. I love using this for solar burn. I can just spam grenades over and over and over. For Crucible, though, I will sometimes use Cauterize. Enemies brought down by your fire regenerate your health. You combine Cauterize with Fleet Fire and Suncharge, and you are really, really hard to kill out of your super. You're really hard to kill. The last one here is Firekeeper. While standing in a sunspot, you gain an Overshield and Hammer of Soul lasts longer. I don't like this one. It sounds really good in theory, but in actuality, you're just getting a bit of an overshield, but you're standing perfectly still, making yourself an easier target to kill. So I don't use this all that often. So those are my subclass builds. Now let's talk about the gear. As I said, when I'm running Striker in the Crucible, I will use Helm of Inmost Light that grants Death from Above and Headstrong. Alternatively, I will sometimes use Armamentarium in the Crucible. It's always good to have an additional grenade. There's not really anything else I need to say about that. When I'm running Defender, I will switch things up a little bit. I will use either Helm of Saint 14, Glass House, or the Rune Wings. I will also use these for Striker too if I'm not in the Crucible. This is my main exotic. This is pretty much what I keep on all the time in PvE, unless the situation is going to call for me to use Helm of Saint 14 or the Glass House. I don't use these in Crucible because obviously there's no point in using these in Crucible, but other than that, I'm going to use one of these two helmets, or in Crucible I will use this, and in Crucible I will use that, and that's pretty much it. I used to keep Immolation Fist on my Titan, but with the rarity that I use, or the few amount of times that I actually use Sunbreaker, it did make sense for me to keep it there. I would much rather have those two exotic shards, so I did get rid of that, and these are the only exotic pieces of armor that I keep on my Titan, and that's because I don't really have any need to use any of the other stuff. Like I can get everything that I need done with these exotics. For class items, it's not really any reason to go through all that. For the artifact, I typically keep on grants a detailed radar. The only time that I will switch to something else is if I'm in a raid, or if I'm in the Crucible. Sometimes I will go with something like remove sprint cooldown penalty. If I'm going into, I forget which game mode it is, like Mayhem Rumble or whatever it is, where you don't have a radar, then I'm going to switch to this. But other than that, I typically keep this on for both PvE and PvP because knowing where your enemies are coming from is automatically going to give you an advantage. As far as the gear stats and perks that I use, I typically try to keep rocket launcher ammo on my boots on all three of my characters because I do like to use Gallarhorn. Over here, I would prefer to have either hand cannon ammo or sniper ammo, one or the other. So that's always going to be good to have. Over here, I would like a reload bonus with my slowest reloading weapon, which in this case would be machine guns. So I re-rolled this so many times to get Intellect Discipline and Machine Gun Loader because I do like to use Quillam's Terminus in Crucible, and I will also use it sometimes in PvE as well. So because that's my slowest reloading weapon, then that's what I want my bonus on. And over here, I really like my helmets to have infusion, where picking up an orb gives you a portion of your health back. And actually, I don't think I have that on any of this. I just have bonus melee energy, replenish health. There you go. Infusion. So this is my favorite perk to have on helmets, replenish health each time you pick up an orb. For these perks, I don't really care. I typically run Second Thoughts because I do use my secondary a lot. But other than that, I don't really care. As far as the intellect and discipline and strength rolls, I try to maintain tier 11 as much as I can, with my primary focus being on intellect for my super and discipline for my grenade. And last, I try to maintain at least a tier 1 on strength. It is entirely possible to get tier 12 stats, which would be 5, 5, and 2, but I don't really care about all that. I don't use my melee all that much, so it's not really a concern of mine. But anyway, moving on to weapons, as I've said in my other videos, I like to keep a ghost shell that has intellect, discipline, and fallen ether seeds. So again, I will say it a third time, Dread Explorer shell is pretty much the perfect ghost shell for Rise of Iron. For heavy, I'm not going to go too deep into this because I keep the same weapons in the exact same spot on all three of my characters. You can go look at my other two videos for the Warlock and the Hunter, and you will see here that I have a fucking Burning Eye. You will see here that on my other two characters I have a Cocytus. Unfortunately, I have to use a Badger for this character, but it has similar perks. Here I have a Mida Multi-Tool. I have the same thing for my Hunter, and on my Warlock, this is replaced by Talilok. Here I have Bad Juju on all three. Here, all three of my characters have an Invective, Black Spindle, and Telesto, and a Fusion Rifle in the same spots. And here, all three of the swords and all of this shit is in the exact same spots. It's a little OCD, but I don't like having to switch weapons just to go do an activity every time I switch characters, so I maintain each character's individual weapons so that I can just swap to a character and be ready to go. But that being said, I will go ahead and do a brief rundown of how I use my weapons. I prefer Palindrome in the Crucible. If I'm not using Palindrome in the Crucible, then I'm using my Hawksaw that has full auto and max stability. I don't have it on this character right now, but it is a fucking laser beam, and it is really good. And another thing that I will do in the Crucible is I will typically run the Harrowed Quillam's Terminus. If I'm using a close quarters primary, then I will use a sniper as my secondary. If I'm using more of a long range primary, then I will use a shotgun as my secondary. I try to complement my primary and secondary in such a way that I have close, medium, and long range covered at all times. So that's typically how I pick which weapons I'm going to be using. If I'm running a short or a close range map, you know, something that's going to have a lot of close range engagements and not very many long range engagements, then I will do something like a hand cannon and a shotgun. Alternatively, if I'm playing on a map like Shores of Time, where I'm probably not going to have very many up close and personal engagements, then I might run something like a scout and a sniper and just build this class mostly for long range. But anyway, guys, that is going to bring this video to an end. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you found it helpful. If you did, click like. If you're new to the channel, click subscribe. And if you're already subscribed, I fucking love you. And I don't know if you guys can tell, but my voice is getting a little scratchy. I think that it's about to go out because I've recorded 3 videos today, and all of them have been over 20 minutes long. So I've been talking to myself for the past fucking hour. So if you could, guys, if you enjoyed this video, seriously, man, drop it a like because it really does help the channel. Every time you leave a rating on a YouTube video, it helps YouTube promote it more. So by dropping a like, it really does help the channel because it's going to make YouTube promote the video more, which gets me a wider audience, which makes the channel grow. So if you enjoyed it, seriously, click like, and I fucking love you. Thank you for watching. Take care, guys.